Back in 1990, the world was absolutely glued to their screens as this massive international coalition came together to deal with an aggressive invasion. This is the story of the First Gulf War, a conflict that really defined a new kind of warfare and completely redrew the map of the modern Middle East. So let's get into how it all went down.
The mother of all battles. That's how Iraqi President Saddam Hussein saw it. He was framing this thing as this epic, historic showdown against the West.
But, for everyone else watching at home, it felt different. Live TV broadcasts showing these precision bombs hitting their targets with pinpoint accuracy. It gave the whole thing this weirdly sanitized, almost unreal feeling. And that's how it earned the nickname the video game war.
So you've got these two totally different pictures, right? The mother of all battles on one side and the video game war on the other. The truth, of course, lies somewhere in between. So how did this all kick off, and what were the consequences that we're still feeling today?
Okay, so to really get this, we have to rewind a little bit. The seeds of this war were actually planted a couple of years earlier with the end of another really brutal war that left Iraq in a total mess financially.
So, picture this. Iraq just got out of this devastating 8-year war with Iran, and they are flat broke. They are drowning in debt, and a huge chunk of it, about $14 billion, is owed to their tiny, super-rich neighbor, Kuwait. Saddam tried to pressure Kuwait to just forgive the debt, but Kuwait said no. Then, he accused them of waging economic war, saying they were overproducing oil to drive the price down and even stealing Iraqi oil by drilling sideways under the border. Diplomacy failed, Iraq moved its army to the border, and on August 2, 1990, they went in.
And when they went in, man, it was fast, shockingly fast. At the time, Iraq had, believe it or not, the fourth largest army on the entire planet. Their forces just flooded across the border, and in 48 hours, it was over. They had total control of Kuwait. Saddam simply declared it was now the 19th province of Iraq.
Saddam basically rolled the dice thinking the world would just sit back and watch. Well, he was dead wrong. The international reaction was swift and incredibly strong. Just look at this number, 42. That's how many countries came together to form a military coalition to stand against Iraq. Now you have to remember, the Cold War had just ended, so this was this really unique moment in history where you could get this kind of global cooperation, especially since everyone had an interest in making sure one guy didn't control that much of the world's oil. It was actually the biggest military alliance since World War II.
So, on the diplomatic front, the UN really stepped up. The Security Council passed resolution after resolution condemning Iraq and hitting them with severe economic sanctions. Then came the big one, Resolution 678. It was basically an ultimatum. It gave Saddam a deadline: get out of Kuwait by January 15, 1991, or face the consequences, the use of all necessary means.
And that threat led to what was called Operation Desert Shield. For 5 months, coalition forces, led by the US, just poured into the region. Now, the whole point at first wasn't to attack Iraq. It was purely defensive. It was about drawing a line in the sand, literally, to protect Saudi Arabia from being the next target.
Okay, so let's look at the matchup. On paper, it looks kinda even, right? Iraq even had way more tanks. But here's the kicker: air power. The coalition had more than double the number of aircraft, and they were way more advanced. That right there was going to be the game changer. That technological edge was absolutely decisive.
So, the deadline came and went. Saddam didn't move. And just like that, the mission flipped. Operation Desert Shield became Operation Desert Storm. And in the early hours of January 17th, the storm began. It started with this massive, overwhelming air campaign. Coalition jets, including brand new stealth fighters, hit targets all across Iraq and Kuwait. The goal was simple: take apart Iraq's entire military machine from the air before a single boot hit the ground.
And when I say massive, I mean it. Check out this number, 88,500 tons. That's how many bombs were dropped in just 42 days. It was one of the most concentrated bombing campaigns in all of military history. Just an incredible amount of firepower.
So, how did Iraq fight back? Well, their main weapon was the Scud missile. And Saddam wasn't just firing them randomly. He aimed them at Saudi Arabia, sure, but also at cities in Israel. Now, this was a really cynical but clever move. He was trying to bait Israel into the fight, hoping it would break up the coalition's Arab partners. To counter this, the US flew in Patriot missile defense systems. They were there to shoot down the Scuds, providing a really important psychological shield, even if they didn't always hit their target.
Now, Iraq did try one big move on the ground.
They attacked this Saudi town called Khafji, but the whole battle basically proved one thing. Trying to move tanks around when the other side completely owns the sky, well, it's just not going to work. The attack was crushed by a mix of Saudi, Qatari, and American forces, all backed by relentless air power.
Okay, so after over a month of just pummeling from the air, it was time for the final phase, the ground war to free Kuwait.
Now, the plan here was brilliant. It wasn't a straight-on charge. No, they did something called the left hook. Imagine this. They faked an attack on the coast to keep the Iraqis looking one way, while the main force, this huge armored column, swung way out into the open desert, looped completely around, and then slammed into Iraq's best troops, the Republican Guard, from behind. Classic flanking maneuver.
And when those tank forces finally clashed, wow, we're talking about some of the biggest and also most one-sided tank battles in American history. In places like 73 Easting, the American M1 Abrams and British Challenger tanks could literally destroy Iraqi tanks from miles away, long before the Iraqis even knew they were there.
So as the Iraqi army started to collapse and flee Kuwait, they all got jammed up on these highways heading north. And what happened next? Well, it was the complete opposite of that clean video game image. Coalition planes just hammered those columns relentlessly. The images that came out were haunting, just this long, grim trail of destruction. They called it the Highway of Death.
And you know what's crazy? The whole ground war was over in just 100 hours. That's it, a little over 4 days. Iraqi resistance completely fell apart, President Bush declared a ceasefire, and the main goal, liberating Kuwait, was done.
But here's the thing. A quick, decisive military win doesn't always mean a clean ending. The aftermath of the Gulf War was messy, really complicated, and we are still dealing with the fallout today.
So let's break down what happened next, because this is so important. First, the coalition decided not to go to Baghdad and remove Saddam Hussein, so he stayed in power. And what's the first thing he does? He turns his remaining military on his own people, brutally crushing uprisings. As they retreated, his forces also set fire to hundreds of oil wells in Kuwait, creating a massive environmental disaster. And for the next decade, the Iraqi people suffered under harsh sanctions. Veterans came home with the mysterious Gulf War syndrome, and the no-fly zones set the stage for years of conflict that led directly to the next war in 2003.
And all of that leaves us with this one big nagging question. Yeah, the fighting stopped, but with Saddam still there and all these new problems created, was the war really over? Or was this just Act 1 of a much longer story?